What is up guys, Anfield here. Welcome back to a new video. Today's video we're going to be looking at the WZ-1115A, which is a new tier 10 Chinese heavy tank to go alongside the 113 that we currently have. It was released in the patch 9.1, I believe. Wargaming's patching system is so bad. But yeah, I believe that's what we just had. So yeah, that came out today and I had the experience from the previous tier 9. So we're going to talk a little bit about the tier 9 as well, but mostly about the two tier 10s and how they compare and how the WZ did on its first day. I played 25 battles in it, got a relatively good feel for the tank at a casual level, so I don't know, I would like to have a discussion on the tank, let you guys know exactly how I feel about the tank and whether it's worth it. Now, I will also say that before I get into the heavy tanks, that the 121 also receives similar gun depression buffs that the 113 got, which actually sort of makes the 121 much more competitive than it used to be. So if you have that sitting in your hangar, it might be a bit of a time to take the tank out and dust it off a little bit and see how it plays. I haven't played it personally, I can only make a guess, but gun depression buff's huge when it comes to these kind of tanks. Their ability to deliver damage is greatly improved when you consider added gun depression, because before they had to really struggle with gun depression. Gun depression goes such a long way in delivering damage, it honestly cannot be understated enough. So these are significant buffs to these tanks. But regardless, let's get back to the heavy tanks. Now, originally I actually wasn't going to go for the WZ-1115A, and the reason for that was because, well, I had a few tanks that I kind of wanted. I didn't know if I really wanted the tank, and I knew it was going to be a lot of effort to get the tank. I don't particularly enjoy playing premiums, and so playing the amount of premium battles I needed in order to get the tank, while for some people would be a really enjoyable experience, for me would not be so much. But regardless, Legendary from the stream was like, yo, here's a bunch of credits. So yeah, big shout out to him, because I wouldn't have got this tank if it was not for his huge generosity. So yeah, he sent me a bunch of credits and I did as he wanted, and I bought the WZ tier 9 and I began grinding experience on the tank in order preparation for the new patch and the new tank, which I did. Well, I was mostly able to accomplish. I used a bit of free XP that I had built up, not actually converted any experience, I just had free XP. So I was able to use some of that because the patch actually came a lot earlier. It was kind of like, you know, out of the blue really. I expected it more towards the end of the month, but it came quite soon, to be honest with you. Although ultimately, to be honest with you, the patch is pretty empty in terms of content, so maybe it's not so surprising. But regardless, I ground the XP on the tank. I didn't particularly enjoy that tank. Although I did play the tier 10 on the test server, it began to sort of worry me a little bit, like, you know, is my memory a little bit skewed, because this tank is pretty awful. Now, it's not actually awful. It's pretty good for most people, I'd say. It's just that I hate poor gun handling on tanks, and this tank's gun was just such a pain to handle. Yeah, it wasn't fun for me to deal with it. I'd like to have less RNG dependent guns. Tanks with good gun handling suit me, but I think for most people this tank would be a very good tank, the tier 9 that is, because the alpha is just so good. I mean, 490 alpha is just packs such a punch that, you know, you can go and just wreck people in battles. But ultimately, you know, it didn't suit me. I didn't really like the armor either. The gun handling, the armor, and then also the lack of gun depression, which was a bit of a pain. However, the tier 10 completely changes a lot of this. The armor improves a little bit, I'd say, not a great deal, not quite like 113 level. The 113 definitely has the better armor, I would say, but the WZ does have much better gun handling. It's a huge increase of DPM. In fact, the DPM is basically the same as the 113 despite having 50 more alpha. Generally you see alpha tanks having lower amounts of DPM, but I mean, okay, technically the 113 is sort of considered an alpha tank, but this tank has 50 more, so you'd expect it to have lower DPM because alpha trades much better. And alpha is really important in the game. It means you can go around corners in these corridor maps that Wargaming likes so much, and you can do a really nice job. Now, what's improved even further about this is the tank actually has a huge amount of gun depression. We were memeing a bit on the stream. I was telling people that it was 10 degrees of gun depression, which is what I'd originally had. It still felt like 10 degrees of gun depression, so yeah. Fake news that it's 7 degrees, you guys, you know. We're gonna have 10 degrees of gun depression. It's gonna be great. Mexico's gonna pay for it. But regardless, it does have a great deal of gun depression, which is incredibly useful for delivering that amount of alpha. You've got a very small turret, and it does have 2 hatch weak points, similar to the 140, I would say, in that regard. But it does use the gun depression so very well, and the hatches aren't exactly huge hatches, so it's kind of difficult to hit them, I would say. So it does a very good job at delivering that alpha. There's nothing better than really coming over hills and being able to punch people for 490 alpha, really. It is a very gratifying amount of damage, and because the gun actually handles much better, you're more reliably able to get that damage out, which is a significant improvement over the predecessor tier 9. So definitely something to keep in mind at least. But how does this tank compare to the 113? Well, the 113 does have better armor. I would definitely say that. Its armor is able to be much better utilized. It doesn't have to worry about having a weak pike nose, so it's not that big of an issue. You can angle the tank, you can side scrape a little bit better with that tank because it doesn't have a pike nose. The turret is actually much better laid out, and the fact that the hatches are almost impossible to hit, so that's generally more useful. Obviously, the 113 also received these gun depression buffs, which makes that tank much better than it was before. Let's not forget that the 113 was already a very powerful tank and a very meta tank as well, which begs the question whether the WZ will also become a tank picked in Clan Wars or esports. So, something that perhaps remains to be seen, but in pub matches, at least the 113 was a very popular tank. So I reckon this tank will also be a very popular tank, especially because people that already own the 113 can just go back and already get the XP on the previous tier 9, which is really nice. It's kind of similar to the way the T54 works, that it leads to both the 62A and the 140. So both tanks are very, very good in terms of gun depression now. The 113 has a little less gun handling than the WZ, which kind of sucks, and also it has the less alpha. So really it comes down to what you value more significant armor, or whether you kind of value the alpha of the WZ as well as the handling to a degree. The 113 is a little bit faster, but the WZ isn't a slouch, so it's not something it has against it. You can really hold that against it, but it isn't as fast as the 113. But it does seem to maneuver a little bit better. I think it has a better maneuverability, but regardless whether it does or doesn't, the 113 is definitely the quicker, more flexible tank in that regard. But again, the WZ is going to pack a heftier punch. Now, even though the DPM technically is higher on the 113, but they're almost identical, I personally believe you're going to get higher damage in the WZ. It's really what it's theory crafting at this point. You're arguing against whether the armor of the 113 will mean that you survive longer and therefore are able to get more damage out, or whether the alpha of the WZ is more important and allows you to trade better. You're going to hit people harder than you will with the 113. Let's not forget that, in this game, you can't always be firing at someone. There's shots here and there. You can't fire the second you're off reload every single time and hit someone. So the alpha of your tank is quite important. So I do actually rate that quite highly, as well as the gun handling on the WZ itself. Both tanks have the equivalent gun depression, so that has to be put aside. But regardless of what you think, both tanks are incredibly good, and I cannot recommend these two enough to you guys. I really do think that they're worth it. If you haven't already ground the 113, definitely go for the WZ now. That's the tier 9, that is, because then you have options for both of them, and whichever one you choose first, it doesn't really matter because both are very, very good tanks for different reasons. Do you value armor or do you value alpha? And that's really what it comes down to. So play what you're going to enjoy, but to be honest with you, both these tanks are going to be very, very enjoyable tanks, and the 1212 could also be a very enjoyable tank now that that too has gun depression. Could be very interesting to see. Wargaming have changed a lot of things. The direction they're sort of taking the game is quite interesting, and you never know what might be on the buff list next. I mean, we look at the patterns that were mentioned. Both tanks are receiving incredible turret armor buffs, the M46 and the M48, and the M48 is getting a different turret, so that has a much smaller commander's hatch, which is quite a significant buff for that tank. So regardless, it's very interesting to see where they're sort of taking their tanks. Generally, they look like overall buffs are coming to tanks. Whether that means they're going to leave the mouse alone, I don't know. I still think that tank does need the nerf, but the nerfs that they suggested on the tank, like HB nerf, like it's not what the tank needs. Oh well. But regardless, it's an interesting step, and we'll have to see exactly what happens. But the gun depression is going to be an interesting aspect with these tanks, and I think you're going to probably see a lot of these vehicles in game. I mean, there's already a lot of 113s in pubs before. Now there's going to be even more, and the WZ as well. But I really enjoyed this tank. I think it's very fun. Whether I'll 3-mark the tank, I don't know. Obviously, I'm still sort of fresh to the tank, and I'm only playing it at a casual level while I'm streaming it. Whether I'll do a tryhard stream or not, I'm not entirely sure. I'll think about it. We'll see maybe where we are closer to 80 to 100 battles, and I'll see whether I really want to go for the mark. I think I probably will, but, you know, not entirely sure just yet. I have to really like a heavy tank before I'll commit to a mark, because I much more enjoy playing the medium playstyle than the heavy playstyle. But these tanks, well, certainly the 113, but also the WZ do sort of feel like mediums with massive alpha guns, so they are a lot of fun. And yeah, I definitely recommend this tank if you have not played it already or are thinking about playing it. Yeah, it gets my seal of approval, so to speak. But regardless, thank you so much for watching the video, guys. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that it sort of helped you make up your mind on these tanks, or at least gave you a little bit of a better idea about where I stand. And so there, maybe that, I don't know, maybe that influences your decision or something. I don't know. Regardless, thanks once again, guys, and I will catch you on the next video.